First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part one of a special educational event on aligning your money with your values. This is a two-part webinar. This is part one, and part two will take place same time next week. So my name is Anne-Christine Strugnall. I'm the Communications Director of the Environmental Forum of Marin. EFM was founded almost 50 years ago to educate people in Marin about the environment of this beautiful place and to inspire them to take personal and political action on environmental issues. We are based in Marin County, which we should all remember is the unceded traditional homelands of the Coast Miwok people. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Marin Community Foundation. Your registration fee for this webinar covers only part of the cost of putting on these events, so we rely on the generosity of our sponsors to help keep this show on the road. I often MC webinars for EFM, but this one is truly different for me because it's inspired by my personal journey. When I first realized back in, I think it was 2015, I really woke up to the fact that climate change threatened everything I loved, from my morning cup of green tea, to my house, to my family and friends, to the future of every living thing. It hit me really hard. It felt like we should all be working all day, every day to avert the climate crisis, and I didn't know how to even start. So the first thing I did back then is I signed up for Resilient Neighborhoods, which is a fantastic program I recommend to everyone in Marin. I learned how to measure and reduce my personal environmental impact, and that's guided my choices ever since, and also given me the tremendous comfort of knowing that I'm really doing things every day to make a difference to the climate crisis and protect the things that I love. And one of the things I learned in this program eventually led to my putting together this webinar. So at one of the Resilient Neighborhoods meetings, Tamara Peters, the founder of Resilient Neighborhoods, pointed out that although we only get to vote a few times a year, we can vote every day with our dollars. The purchases we make reward certain companies and enable them to thrive, and deprive other companies of our financial support. I learned that something as simple as my choice of chocolate was actually a vote for childhood slavery or against. Even though it's not on the label, it's relatively easy to get this kind of information once you're aware of it, except I had no idea beforehand. It was all new to me. And I'll provide a few resources for you to help you do that in my email tomorrow, because we're not going to be talking about reading labels today. For me, that was just the first step in a journey that has made me aware of the many ways in which we're usually kept in the dark about the true consequences of our financial choices. The fact is, money is power. And if we want to use our money to support our own values, rather than the agenda of big businesses and marketers and other people, we have got to get smart about all the ways in which we can claim that power for ourselves and our own beliefs. And that, in short, is what these two webinars are all about. Without necessarily changing how much you are spending, how much you are investing, or how much you have, you can change what you are supporting. So just to review the agenda, Leah, if you could please put up the agenda, where our first speaker is going to be Sarah Briner, the Director of Research and Strategy at Open Secrets. And she's going to show us how to follow the money from the cash register to Congress and beyond. Next up is Allison Kirsch, Policy and Research Manager of the Climate and Energy Team at Rainforest Action Network. She'll be telling us how we can find out who's banking on climate chaos. Then Kellen Damon from Marketing and Outreach of the Marin County Sustainability Team will make the economic case for sustainability projects at home. So as you go through this webinar, again, if questions come to you, please put them in Q&A, not in the chat. But if you're feeling inspired and want to declare your commitment to taking one of the actions our speakers suggest, please say so in the chat. You'll be helping us to know that this program is making a difference, and you'll also be inspiring others. As I said, this program reflects my own journey. It started in the aisles of a grocery store, choosing the companies with the most ethical business practices. But as I became more savvy, I realized that products are only part of the story, because where you buy products from matters too. So without further ado, let's delve into that by listening to Sarah Briner as she illuminates the hidden path our dollars take once we part with them at the cash register. Sarah, you're up.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. Like Anne-Christine said, I am the Director of Research and Strategy for Open Secrets. We are a DC-based nonprofit, nonpartisan organization devoted to shining a light on the way that money influences politics from the state level up to the presidential elections. And it's a really great organization. I've been there for about 11 years. We recently merged, a year ago, merged with an organization focused entirely on tracking money in state politics called followthemoney.org. And I will be showing off some of the resources that we now maintain through our merger with that organization. So to get started, I think I, like many of you, made a million decisions today. Everything from what am I going to make for dinner, especially since I'm going to be giving this webinar during dinner time. Do I sign up my 6-year-old for swimming classes? Should I buy that new pair of boots now that they're on sale? Few decisions that we make weigh on us more than those that affect our pocketbooks. But few of us really consider the full implications of our spending decisions. The company that benefits from our purchases, what do they do with that money? Many companies are involved in the American political process, and I think that far too few people are aware of the sort of details behind how what you buy may be reaching the account of a member of Congress. We know a fair bit about which companies emit toxic pollution or clear-cut rainforests or use child slavery to produce chocolate bars. But I think that the American political system, particularly the ways that money influences the American political system, is an area that is not understood enough. So to understand the way that a decision about what we eat or buy might far downstream affect abortion rights or environmental policy, I need to talk in more detail about the way that US campaigns are financed. In 2020, the federal elections cost over $14 billion. And while many people think that that is quite expensive, few Americans really understand that the political universe that we live in is quite unique. Very few democratic nations have privately funded elections. In most European countries, elections are funded by the state. And when that is the case, the amount of spending, when it is spent, how much it is spent, and how it can be spent is vastly smaller. Election time periods are much more truncated in many European countries. Our Supreme Court has agreed numerous times that political speech and the spending that can amplify it is protected by the First Amendment, which means that if I'm planning to run for president in 8 years, I can start spending money, AKA speaking, now, and they cannot limit that speech. No government entity can. The Citizens United and Speech Now Supreme Court decisions in 2009, which are often credited for identifying money as speech, which is partially true, were identified as identifying money as speech, which is partially true. But even prior to those cases, one major factor influencing the cost of US elections is the fact that candidates are constitutionally protected in when they can spend their money. That means that Donald Trump can theoretically run advertisements for a 2024 campaign now. He's actually already raised $122 million, I believe. And that can lead to a much longer campaign season than is typical in basically every other country in the world. So we know that our elections are expensive. We know that they're privately financed. But how do we figure out which politicians are being funded by which companies or people? Thankfully, while the Supreme Court has upheld this sort of this speech as politics and protected speech criteria, they have also maintained the right of the public to know how political money is spent and who is donating to politicians. So that was reaffirmed in the Citizens United cases. There are some pretty impressive ways that companies can donate directly to politicians and political issue campaigns. And I'm going to start sharing my screen now so that I can walk you through some of the resources that will help you with this kind of research. So this webpage that I'm showing is from our site followthemoney.org. which tracks donations at the state and local and some local locality, the local level. So here you can see, they have a ton of data. And you can see here the ballot measure committees in several election years in several states, although most of them are California. And you can see how much money was given to those ballot measure committees. So I happen to know that California has, a lot of expensive ballot measures, but $205 million is a very interesting and large sum of money for a state organization. So if you want to know, I know this is there was an Uber sort of app-based drivers and services ballot initiative back in California in 2020. If you click on that, you can see, say you want to know who's really sort of funding this Protect App-Based Drivers and Services, a coalition of on-demand drivers and networks, companies, small businesses, community groups, and public safety organizations. But who really is that? Let's find out. So you can see the top donors to that ballot measure committee were Uber, DoorDash, Lyft, Instacart, Postmates, and then a couple other smaller donors. So, I think that oftentimes political groups try to obfuscate what they do through the name of their ballot measure committee or their organization. And the follow the money tool allows you to really dig into who is funding these organizations. So this Alliance for Better California, another ballot measure committee, looks like it's funded primarily, almost entirely by teachers' unions. So if there's a ballot initiative that is of interest to you, particularly one that you oppose, you can use this tool to see who's funding that ballot initiative and then adjust your spending and your consumer decisions accordingly. So I think that this is really cool. And this is one area, one of the few areas in modern politics where money can go directly to issues. And that's because these ballot measure committees are not people. And so the Supreme Court has argued that that reduces or eliminates the risk of corruption. Because if you're donating to a ballot initiative, even if you're Uber, you're not donating to a politician, and therefore it's not quite quid pro quo. So take with that what you will. At the federal level, it's a lot more convoluted. So even though, if you remember back to 2009, even though at the time there was much discussion about money being speech and people being able to sort of buy and sell politicians, that's not actually what ended up happening, at least not with the money that we can see. So if you go to opensecrets.org, our sort of main website, we have all of these resources about who is funding federal politicians, political groups, and so on. So after the Citizens United decision, companies became able to donate directly to committees that support but are not linked to politicians. Again, donating as a company directly to a politician was seen as too close to quid pro quo bribery. However, very few companies do this, and this actually will get to my main point. If you look at our list of corporate contributions to outside groups, those are the kind of super PACs that Citizens United led to being sort of proliferating. You can see a long list of sort of obscure companies that we probably don't know very much about, or oil companies. So if you're in the market to buy, a few 100 gallons of crude oil, then sure, you can adjust your consumer decisions based on who is receiving money from these organizations. That being said, barely anyone, very few of these are consumer focused organizations. With a few exceptions. So Melaleuca is a multi-level marketing company that makes, I think, like healthcare products, sort of healthcare adjacent products, and they donate quite a large sum of money to some conservative sort of Republican Party linked super PACs. Koch Industries is one you probably have heard of quite a bit. They own a paper manufacturing company. So there are a few cases where you can kind of tie that directly to the way that the company donates, but this is it's relatively uncommon in the grand scheme of federal politics. What's much more common and a much simpler way to kind of approach this is to look at the way that a company's PAC behaves. nearly every major company in the United States has what's called a political action committee. The political action committee is funded by employees of the company and is governed by a political board, sort of managed by the political arm of the company. So it's not corporate money, it's employee money that's being routed through the political governors of the company to political candidates. It's limited in amount, fairly small dollar amounts in a $14 billion election ecosystem, but it can be an important and sort of useful tool to getting a sense for how the company is acting in our political environment. So you might remember a long time ago when Target got into trouble for donating, in that case it was directly, to an anti-LGBTQ rights candidate in Minnesota. They had to backtrack that a lot because it caused some outrage. And that just goes to show that these kind of political monetary decisions are consumer sensitive. So most PACs are usually making decisions that are not based on ideology, they're based on access. And so that in some ways makes it both harder and easier to manipulate them, because you want access, you need access even to people who you might not agree with. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of people in Congress, and so they might not care as much about they might not really have that members, might not be that close to their heart, shall we say. So how do we find out who a PAC is giving to? On Open Secrets, again, you can go to our organization profiles. Let's say that you're shopping for a washing machine or a dishwasher, and you're trying to choose between something manufactured by General Electric and by Whirlpool or Maytag, same company. And you want to see which one of those two companies is more in line with my values on the environment or abortion or just plain politics. Here, you can search for Whirlpool Corp, and it will take you to an internal server error. And that happened to me yesterday. Hopefully that doesn't stick around. Oh, I know why that's happening. Our website's in the middle of getting updated to 2022. Okay, so it'll take you to this, well, theoretically, it'll take you to Whirlpool Corp's organization profile. Most places on Open Secrets, we combine individual donations with political action committee donations, because if a CEO or a VP of a company is making a donation and we don't have any other information about that donor, we sort of lump them in the same interest group as their employer. But you can, if you're only interested in the PAC money, you can sort by the money coming directly from the organization. So they are, they gave $349,000 employees in the PAC from Whirlpool. The biggest recipients from the PAC itself were Fred Upton, Jim Jordan, Rob Portman, Billy Long, a couple Democrats, Joni Ernst, the NRCC. So it looks like from here a pretty conservative PAC, and I'd say that that's probably true across history. So let's say, let's theoretically say that you're a Democrat, and you're not super happy with that, and bounce on over to General Electric, which obviously is a major company, owns a gazillion things, but this is just an exercise to show how this is possible. You can do the same thing, sort by amount, and you'll see, again, sort of a mix. The party committees actually received, they don't really give a ton of PAC money to candidates. So the party committees received around $30,000 from each party committee from GE. So a little bit maybe more mixed. And the sort of overall donation across time also looks like it bounces around a little bit more mixed. So again, let's say you align more closely with liberal policies or the Democratic Party. It looks like with this metric, at least, General Electric might be more in your wheelhouse than Whirlpool. We try to make this simple for basically anything. Let's say I'm trying to figure out how do I spell McDonald's? Whether I want to buy a hamburger. I'm going to take you over to the PAC data itself so you can kind of see McDonald's. I didn't have the apostrophe. You can see how this sort of plays out if you're just looking at PAC data. You can see McDonald's, again, mostly like a slight edge to Republicans, although maybe not as much as some people expect. You can see the candidates who took money from, who are taking in this cycle, money from McDonald's. Oftentimes, again, this is very access focused. So it'll be members who sit on the committees that McDonald's is interested in reaching. But it looks like it has a pretty Republican tilt. Its alternative, I guess, is Yum Brands. And so which owns like Taco Bell and Burger King. And you can see, again, it's a pretty conservative leaning company. So what you do with that is kind of up to you. Do you just not eat fast food? I mean, maybe. Or do you exert pressure on those companies to stop giving their money to Republicans? I think that's kind of like, those are the options that we have available to us if you're not like a PAC director. And I think it's just good to know that that information exists. It also is good for counteracting stereotypes about companies, particularly when it comes to greenwashing. So I talked about Target. I think people think of Target as the cooler, maybe more progressive sibling of Walmart. But actually, they're pretty even-handed, like most PACs, in their PAC giving with a slight edge to Republicans. I think people think of Walmart as a conservative, sort of Bible Belt company, but it's actually not that skewing of Republicans. Probably in more recent years, it's given more to on the sort of Democratic side than Target has. So I think that we draw a lot of conclusions based on companies' marketing, and those conclusions might not actually align with what the company is doing with their political money. How much do PACs care? How much do companies care about what we think of their political donations? Actually, we have found that they care a lot. If you think about January 6th, hundreds of political action committees very quickly decided that they were going to stop giving money to members of Congress who voted to overturn the election results, the 2020 presidential election results. And although many of those have kind of walked back into the political system since then, I think that that sort of responsiveness was a mass shift in our political world, where these companies responded very directly to the concerns of consumers. I talked about Target earlier. Again, they walked back that donation after public outcry. So we don't necessarily need, public outcry or insurrection to make these changes, particularly for companies that might have maybe a smaller footprint than something like Walmart. Because if you're upset that Walmart is giving money to Steve Womack, you might be out of luck, because I think that's their representative for their corporate headquarters. But if you're upset about some of the names on this list, PACs have definitely asked for refunds from politicians and have received them. So with that is my spiel. I hope that you check out all of our resources, and it has been a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
That's cool. Well, thank you so much for your expertise on that today. I really appreciate it. And it's just so eye-opening. The more I learn, the more I realize I just don't know. And also I realize how I'm pretty hopelessly naive about some things. So moving on to the next speaker. So speaking of naive, I have always known that banks make loans. That's part of their business, right? But for me, the next step of my personal environmental journey came when I made the connection that by banking with a particular bank, I was, for example, banking with Wells Fargo at the time, I was financing what they were financing. And at the time, I had no idea what they were financing. So that was a big wake-up moment for me. Our next speaker knows all about that. She comes from Rainforest Action Network, which is one of the world's most respected environmental nonprofits based in the Bay Area. And it produces one of the world's most respected climate reports called Banking on Climate Chaos. So Alison Kirsch is the lead author of this report, and we're very fortunate to have her with us today to tell us how choosing a bank makes a difference. You can tell us more.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for having me, for playing along with that poll. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Yeah, as Anne-Christine mentioned, I'm with Rainforest Action Network, based and currently sitting just across the bay from you all in our very empty office in the financial district. And today I am going to talk about who is banking on climate chaos? And I should specify just from the outset that specifically what I'm going to be talking about is bank financing for fossil fuels. There are other things that contribute to climate change like deforestation, but I'm going to focus on fossil fuels today. Now, we know that, or I assume we all know that, fossil fuels are the primary driver of climate change, and we need to end the creation of new fossil fuel projects. So what do fossil fuel projects need to move forward? They need three things: permits from the government agencies that they're dealing with. They need financing, often from a bank and often from a big bank. And they need insurance for the construction and continued operation of these, really big and often dangerous projects. So our work at Rainforest Action Network focuses on the last two on this list. And today I'm going to focus on the financing, but just to sort of set out also as context, an interesting thing that happened when Donald Trump was elected was we actually saw a lot of energy in this this sort of arena of pushing banks on their fossil fuel financing grow, because when it looks less and less likely that you're going to make headway on number one, right, when the government's not on your side on climate change, numbers 2 and 3 here, where you're pushing private corporations with their own interests and their own governance, suddenly looks a little bit more likely for change. So again, I'm going to be focusing in on the middle section here, which is the financing that fossil fuel projects and companies need in order to exist. And I'm going to lay out the problem and who's contributing to it and to what extent, and go into a little bit of a case study, and then don't worry, end with some proposed solutions and things that we can all do. In terms of laying out the problem, I'm pulling this from the report that Anne Christine mentioned, which is our annual Banking on Climate Chaos report, which is an analysis of banks funding fossil fuels. And what we do is we look at the 60 biggest banks in the world and who they're funding in the fossil fuel industry: coal, oil, and gas. We do this in partnership with 6 other organizations. The report is endorsed by over 300 from around the world. So this really has become a go-to resource that I'm excited to share with you all. And hopefully you'll leave also knowing how you can dig into this more on your own as well. All right, so the top line finding, and I should say this report that I'm talking about came out in March of last year. We are already hard at work on the next version, which will come out next month. So these numbers will be updated soon. Right now they go through 2020. What we found was that in those 5 years after the Paris Agreement was adopted, so 2016 to 2020, the world's 60 largest banks provided the fossil fuel industry with $3.8 trillion in financing, which is a number that our human brains cannot fathom. It is so large. And what I want to point out is in this chart, you'll see that there was a dip 2019 to 2020. You may recall 2020 was a bit of a tumultuous year with the onset of the pandemic, a real contraction in our global economy. So perhaps it's not surprising that fossil fuel funding from the world's biggest banks went down. But what you might just barely be able to notice here is that 2020 funding levels were still higher than in 2016, the year after the Paris Agreement was signed. So 5 years on, this trend line, this orange trend line here is absolutely going in the wrong direction when we look at the global picture of banks' contribution to climate change, right? Their contribution to climate change is not from their buildings. That matters, that they're switching to energy efficient light bulbs in their buildings. But these enormous global banks with huge footprints, this is the impact that they're having on the world. So who's who? And now we're getting a little bit into why we thought it'd be fun to do that little poll question. This is the list of the biggest funders of fossil fuels in the world. JP Morgan Chase, far and away the world's worst by a pretty significant gap, followed by the list you see here. One thing that may be jumping out to us all as based in the US is the dominance of the US banks at the top of this list. JP Morgan Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. I mean, we all know these are household names, you know, and I think our poll just indicated like the sort of market capture that these banks have. In the global view, these banks are the world's biggest funders of fossil fuels. There's also a North American sort of dominance in this chart with 3 Canadian banks popping up in the dirty dozen. So yeah, really interesting to see that regional trend appear. And just to show you to you one more way, the 6 biggest Wall Street banks, so that's these 4 household names plus Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. I saw Goldman Sachs clearly needs to like go to Marin and do some marketing. None of y'all are Goldman Sachs customers. So those 6 banks together make up just about 1/3 of the total fossil fuel financing that we identified over those 5 years from 60 banks. So really outsized influence. And I'm not driving this point home to make anyone feel guilty, though we will get at the end of my presentation into what you can do about your connection to these big banks. Rather, I'm driving it home to underscore that we, you know, as folks in the US who are banking with these US headquartered banks, have a responsibility to push these institutions when we're thinking about climate impact. Because when you know, President Biden thinks about climate impact, he might be thinking about the country's electricity system, and that's obviously part of it. But who's funding that? And who's funding the companies that are deciding whether to build a new coal plant or a new solar plant? And so we need this to be really part of the national conversation because it's such a national problem. So I've been talking so far about the bank's financing for fossil fuels overall, but I'll point out that if you want to dig into this more, we do look at financing for specific parts of the fossil fuel industry that are particularly destructive, carbon intensive, water intensive, you know, damaging in terms of public health to local communities, whether it's tar sands, Arctic oil, coal power. You've got the range here. And on our website, which is down here, I don't have it pulled up to show you interactively, but there is this drop down where you can select what aspect of the data you'd like to look at. Here I've pulled up fracking financing just to show you so that you can see, again, fracking is a US dominated industry. The fracking boom of the last decade has really been an invention of the US. So perhaps it's not surprising that that US dominance in terms of bank funding remains here with Wells Fargo as the world's worst banker of fracking, followed by JP Morgan, Citi. So on our website, you can play around with this data. You can select what you'd like to look at, which years, all of that. I'm not going to get into the details of this complicated and sort of hard to read graph, but what I want to just point out broadly is on the x-axis, you have fossil fuel financing over those same 5 years we've been looking at. And on the y-axis, you have a score that indicates the strength of the bank's policies in terms of what they're doing about it, right? So we look at what they're doing, but we also look at what they say they're going to do. In terms of their policies, we assess them on, do they have a policy saying that they're going to get out of coal by a certain year? And if so, how strong is that policy, et cetera? So this is just a 0 to 200 scale of how strong we think their policies are. Again, I'll point out the US banks down here in not a super attractive position of high financing, low policy scores in comparison to, for example, some of the European banks you can see in that dark green color that are more in the quadrant of lower financing and stronger preventative policies. So depending on how much you've sort of heard about banks and climate so far, you might at this point be thinking, well, I've heard a lot of banks say that they're going to reach net zero. What about that? And in case that's not a familiar term to you, there has been a wave of commitments, not just from the banking sector, but from many corporations in the last year that look like this. They say, we are going to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And for banks, they're talking about the emissions from not their buildings, but the emissions associated with their financing, which, as I mentioned earlier, that's the lion's share of their contribution to the problem. So to debunk this a little bit, what we know, and I won't get into the science or the modeling here, but what we know is that to reach net zero emissions by 2050, there is no room in the climate budget for new coal, new oil, or new gas. So you might think that if a bank has pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050, then it would say, and that means we will no longer fund new coal, oil, or gas. And yet, this is a sampling of some of the biggest banks in the world that have committed to net zero by 2050. As I said, this trend really caught fire last year leading up to the UN climate talks. So you might recognize some big names here. And of the brands featured on this slide, the ones that have committed to end financing for new fossil fuel projects and the companies behind them, just one. It's very recent, and it's a French bank, and it's a big bank, but it's just one. So there's a lot of work to do in pushing these sort of lofty statements for mid-century to be reconciled with what that needs to mean in terms of banks financing today. So I'll get into a case study for a moment now. I imagine many of you are familiar with the Dakota Access Pipeline, or maybe it's something you haven't thought about in a few years, but heard a lot about in like 2016. The Dakota Access Pipeline is a pipeline to bring crude oil from North Dakota to Illinois. It was originally proposed in 2014, and it was around 2016 when it was ready to begin construction. Now, originally, the route would have brought the oil to cross the Missouri River, sort of north of Bismarck, North Dakota, which is a city that is 98% white. And the route was rejected, partially because of the citizens of Bismarck being concerned about their water supplies if the pipeline was crossing the Missouri River and sprung a leak. Now, reinforcing a legacy of environmental racism, the new route that was chosen and eventually built went within half a mile of the Standing Rock Sioux's reservation, destroying sacred sites, and of course threatening their water supply in the very same way that it was originally set to threaten the water supply of this mainly white city in Bismarck. The Standing Rock Sioux had been opposing the pipeline since it was proposed in 2014. And did not consent to the project affecting their territory. And in 2016, they made a formal complaint in the legal process. 6 days after doing that, 17 banks signed a $2.5 billion loan for the companies behind the project to build it. The indigenous-led opposition to this pipeline is what you all might remember because it really grew global. Especially and unfortunately, as the militarized state response to protesters who had joined the struggle on the ground became incredibly repressive. Attack dogs, non-lethal weapons, extreme surveillance of folks on the ground. This might all sound familiar. This is a picture from a protest that I was at right here in San Francisco at Wells Fargo headquarters. Maybe some of you were there as well. What happened was plenty of people were able to go to North Dakota and stand in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in protesting and opposing this project. But for those who weren't, there were 17 banks that had signed up to fund the project who had headquarters and branches all around the world. There were protests in Norway that looked very similar to this one because one of the banks was Norwegian. So what we saw was this eruption of public outcry directed at the banks that were funding this project, you know, given everything that we knew about it and that was happening every day on the ground. So that's a little bit of the context. I bring this up to say, that this matters. So as I said, there was an incredible spread of solidarity protests. And I think what that resulted in was a real sort of pulling back the veil of the fact that banks and their funding results in real impacts on communities and real impacts on the climate. I think this sort of elevated the issue to a national level, and that, to some extent has been maintained since then. In terms of other outcomes, just by December 2016, the count from this article linked at the bottom was that individuals had moved over $28 million in individual accounts from the bank's funding DAPL, funding the Dakota Access Pipeline. So really an incredible coordinated movement that was being tracked. I'm sure the number was higher. This is just what people sort of self-reported. And as all good protests do, what this movement did was create a crisis for the banks. There was a time when the top executives at these banks and specifically their corporate social responsibility teams were doing little else than focusing on their response to the Dakota Access Pipeline and the crisis it had created for their business. In fact, at a protest at the annual shareholder meeting of Citigroup that next year, the chairman actually said, "We wish we could have a do-over on this," which probably was less out of the goodness of his heart and more out of the fact that that was having such an impact on the bank's day-to-day, business operations at that point. Multiple banks sold their stake in the loan, sold their investments in the companies behind the Dakota Access Pipeline. Really importantly, multiple strengthened or even created Indigenous rights policies for what they will and won't finance when there are impacts on Indigenous peoples. We saw legislation, including in the Bay Area, of cities, states saying, we don't want to bank with, for instance, Wells Fargo because it funded the Dakota Access Pipeline. And one really interesting example is fast forward to 2018, and there was a tar sands pipeline that was seeking financing. This is one in the west of Canada called Trans Mountain, and it got financing for this project. And Citi and Wells, who were two of the leads on the Dakota Access Pipeline project financing, who received some of the biggest blowback, did not participate in the Trans Mountain pipeline, which is pretty out of the ordinary from what you would expect them to rubber stamp. So, while they might not say it themselves, we do think that that was in result of all the blowback that they got for Dakota Access Pipeline. So that's a case study really just to illuminate how making noise about banks' connections to the fossil fuel projects and companies that are cooking our planet and harming local communities really is important and can be impactful. So what can we do about it? Well, here are a few thoughts. One is, if you are sticking with the bank that you noted on the poll, there are still ways that you can, pressure that bank as a customer. So this is actually a brand new coalition that Stop the Money Pipeline is shepherding, which is the Customers for Climate Justice campaign. It's in very early days, but essentially there's this effort to organize customers of these big banks because, of course, theoretically, customers, especially when united in large numbers, should have a voice in terms of a company's operations. Spread the word. It sounds cliche, but as Anne-Christine said in her introduction, like, this isn't something that necessarily everyone considers or thinks about when they're thinking about where they're banking. And these kind of conversations really do maintain this crucial issue in the national conversation. Banks are very aware of their customers' loyalty and tendency to stick with them. There's a lot of inertia, right? I'm sure you all are thinking of like, oh God, she's going to ask me to change my bank. The reason you're having that reaction is because once you're with a bank, it's really annoying to change it. So banks are very aware of getting how important it is to get youth accounts, because once you get a youth account, that's likely going to be your customer when that youth is ready to buy a car or get a mortgage. So if you have youth in your life, you can encourage them to think about where they're going to open their first bank account. And in fact, this Not My Dirty Money link is a pledge that youth can take to say, I'm never going to open my first bank account with a fossil fuel funding bank. And those are just some of the examples of ways that you can join these pressure campaigns on the fossil fuel banks. And then in terms of creating solutions, there are also campaigns to create public banks, which would be accountable to the public instead of to shareholders. And there's a vibrant campaign in San Francisco, I'm not sure if North Bay pushes to create a public bank, because California actually already has in place legislation that would allow for such creation. We just haven't actually done it yet. And then, of course, I'm going to say it. This is a webinar about aligning your money with your values. And so that means you can move your money. You can change your bank. So as I said, banks are really keenly aware of that account loyalty. So they're not just thinking when you move your bank about however many dollars are in your account. They're thinking about all the future business that you're not going to be doing with them. Of course, if you do this, don't do it quietly, please. You can talk to your bank account manager, write a letter to the branch manager, write a letter to the CEO, however you like to engage. We want to, of course, encourage you to get as much juice out of you moving your money as you can. And in terms of alternatives, these first two links, Bank for Good and Bank Green, are both different types of tools where you can sort of choose your different considerations, and the website provides some options of alternatives. Essentially, the guideline to keep in mind is that the more local you're looking, the better. And that's partly a factor of scale. More local banks just aren't big enough, don't have the capital to be financing really big fossil fuel companies and projects. And they're more likely to be, involved in community, local projects that you might see around town. So local banks are just at a starting point going to be a better option than any of the banks on this measure, at least. And then, of course, there are credit unions. If you're not familiar, a credit union is sort of like a co-op bank where the customers are essentially members who then, it's a nonprofit institution, and the co-op members are electing the board and things like that. So more control. Again, they're usually small and local. And so even without sort of getting into the weeds on what they do or don't do in terms of their policies, you can be pretty much, especially in the Bay Area, more sure that a local bank or a credit union is not going to be doing this kind of fossil fuel funding. And I'll just close by saying, what else can you do? Of course, join RAN. Join us at RAN.org, donate if you have the means, so that we can keep doing this kind of research and campaigning. And thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was awesome. I know that's a lot of material to cover in a short period of time, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate how you brought it back to action at the end, because like you say, a lot of us are kind of timid about changing our bank. I was with Wells Fargo for so long. I still remember one day I went in and the teller asked me my account number, and I rattled it off. He said, "Wow, I can't believe you know your account number." I looked at him, I said, "I think I opened that before you were born." He said, 1992. I said 1991. So yes, I had opened it long before, but I changed, and it is possible. It's more of a mental hurdle than an actual time effort hurdle. It's just, it takes a little doing, but it feels really good to do it. And I like that you gave resources. We'll also include them in the follow-up email for finding either another national bank or finding a local credit union or some other organization that can help you get your banking done, but you can be sure they're not using your money to finance anything apart from things you approve of. And I love the idea of also helping keep money in a community. I think that's a great way to make your money be doing good rather than fracking. So thank you so much again, Allison. So the next step on my personal journey after I changed banks was deciding what purchases I would need to make and which ones I could afford to make that would actually reduce my climate impact. So I love to close on this topic for this webinar because it bridges this webinar and the next one, which is about investment, because it focuses on how spending money on certain things can in fact be an investment that aligns with your values and that in some cases delivers a higher return than you could get from most financial instruments. So to tell us all about that, I asked Kellen Damon from Marin County Sustainability Team to come and give us some insight on which home upgrades deliver the greatest energy savings and the best return on investment.
Well, thanks, Anne Christine. Thanks, Kim, for inviting me to speak. Yeah, this is really great. Those are some great presentations. It's going to be tough to follow. But yeah, I'm basically going to be talking about stuff you can do in your home, and I'm going to touch on EVs as well. And I'm going to be touching on basically the financial impacts of those decisions, home upgrades, solar, that sort of thing, and really getting down into the economic case for them. So just a short intro, my name is Kellen Damon. I work with the County Marin on the sustainability team. We're housed in the Community Development Agency, where planning, building and safety, and environmental health are. These are the topics I'm going to cover. I'm going to kind of go over them, kind of high level, but, I sent over my slides and they'll be sent out to everybody so you can really drill down in the numbers later on. So the Marin County Sustainability Team, we focus on supporting, healthy, safe, and sustainable communities in Marin. We have a great website. We're on social media, talking about these projects and different rebate programs you can take advantage of. So I encourage you to follow us, and we also do a quarterly newsletter. So brief Energy 101. For single family homes, the messaging that we like to give out is to consider doing, the low to no cost stuff first, and then getting into more expensive projects. So low to no cost would be like LED light bulbs, power strips, faucet aerators, stuff like that. And then getting into the building shell, so insulation, air sealing, I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then after that, you get into the higher ticket items like your HVAC, your water heating, windows, solar, battery backup. And one of the reasons for this is, especially when you consider solar and maybe adding an EV and electrification, is you really want to reduce your home's energy load, before you do all that. So for the case of EVs, you don't have to get as many, for the case of solar panels, you don't have to get as many panels on your system if you reduce your home's energy usage prior to that. And there's some other reasons for this too. For building shell upgrades, it's really, you can really see a big difference in your home's comfort, which I'll get into a little bit more, as well as energy efficiency. So there's a lot of, layering benefits to doing these projects. So I did a little bit of research for this presentation, and I found a couple studies which I've provided links to, but the one I really want to talk about is this first study here on the first bullet point, where they found that a $1,000 investment, so just for LEDs and maybe doing some air sealing, they saw an average of $150 a year energy savings, which is an 18% ROI. And if you think about it in economic terms, money saved is money earned. Money that you don't have to, spend on your utility bill every month, you can put to other things. You can put in the, in your savings account, invest in other things. So it's really good to, reduce your costs and think about that as an investment, especially when it comes to your home. And then LEDs, I pulled this off of Wikipedia because it's great. LEDs are the absolute no-brainer. Basically, you can see here that the lifespan of LEDs are a lot longer than halogens and even CFLs. And then the total cost over 20 years is a lot lower. So for a halogen, you're looking at $128 for a year. LEDs $45. They use a lot less energy, and they've come a long way. They are not, they don't give off that blue light that the first model LEDs did. They come in all sorts of different temperatures, which are the color, and they don't give off any heat, which is great in the summer. So if you still don't have LEDs all throughout your house, it's a really great idea to go ahead and replace those. It's one of the most cheap things you can do, and it's a really great idea for your energy savings. So I'm having trouble seeing this. Oops. So air sealing. I like to show these pictures just because if you've been in your attic or crawl space and you see pictures like this, it's an indication that you might have some efficiency issues that you can address Another thing to consider too is air quality. So, you know, take for instance these ducts right here. This middle picture is showing air intrusion. You know, basically there is a air leak right here in the middle of this duct. So it's pulling air when you're running that, you know, when this home is running their AC or furnace, they're pulling air from the crawl space or attic, wherever that duct is, and putting it into their air system. So that's, you know, one thing we talk about with air quality is you really don't want to mix that air between your, you know, uninsulated area and outside, like your crawl space and attic, because that air is usually pretty dirty. These are just some stats. You know, the average home, you know, leaks, and that can account for about 20% of total energy costs. Duct systems in particular, the average American home duct system leaks like 20–30%. And you can think about that as like a 20 or 30% tax on the money you're paying to either heat or cool your home, because it's just escaping, you know, into the outdoors. So it's really great to make sure that, you know, those duct systems are sealed, and as well as your home. The metaphor I like to use is like a wool sweater and a windbreaker. So on a, you know, cold, windy day, you just have a wool sweater on, you're still going to feel the breeze through your sweater. So that's why you put a windbreaker on. So it's really important to have a well-sealed home, seal up all those air gaps, and then have a good insulation as well. And just last thing on air sealing too, basically anywhere in your home where you've drilled, well, you know, our contractor builder has drilled for plumbing lines, electrical, recessed lighting is a big one. So anywhere where a hole was made in the building envelope is where air can escape. And, you know, it's pretty easy and pretty cost effective to have a contractor come out and do that. Or, you know, if you consider yourself pretty handy, you can grab some caulk from a Home Depot and go and do it yourself. This is just an example of an air sealing job. So this was a attic, and before they installed extra insulation, they went through and they took this caulking and they sealed up all these gaps right here. So insulation would work even better after they put it in. So there are some great programs out there to help pay for projects, energy efficiency projects, even bigger retrofit, electrification projects. The first one I want to talk about is Rising Sun Center for Opportunity. It's available to everybody in the Bay Area, including Marin. And basically they send you a no-cost energy kit in the mail. I did this over the summer because I moved apartments in the city. And they basically just send you a box with LED light bulbs, faucet aerators, power strip, and it's all at no cost. And they do a follow-up phone call to make sure everything was installed correctly, see if you have any questions. This program is really great because they hire local college and high school aged youth to run the program. They used to actually go out to people's homes and install the equipment, but because of COVID, they've shifted to you know, online and sending in the mail model for that. Comprehensive upgrades. So right now in the Bay Area, the BayREN, which stands for the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, it's a program I work on. Their Home Plus program offers rebates up to $5,000 for energy efficiency projects. So that includes some of the stuff I talked about, like insulation and air sealing jobs, upgrading your furnace, and even changing out old gas appliances to efficient electric appliances, like heat pumps for space heating and heat pumps for water heating. And one exciting development there is the TECH program, which is a new program, which it's available for the whole state, but where there's a local program. So in Marin and in the Bay Area, we have you know, the BayREN program. So TECH is basically integrated with the BayREN program, and they're able to offer additional rebates. So for a heat pump water heater project, you're looking at $3,800 or up to that, depending on the size of the water heater project, and $2,800 for a service panel upgrade. So we think these are going to be a game changer. We think it's going to bring a lot of program contractors on board, and we're really excited about it. It's just getting started. So if you're looking into doing a project soon, I would wait a little bit for contractors to get enrolled, maybe a few months. And as always with all this stuff, you can, you know, call our offices and we can talk you through these projects and direct you to contractors and help you navigate the rebate programs. In the County of Marin, we have our own rebate program for electrification projects. So This is on top of the Bay Rent and tech rebates that I just mentioned. And this one's typically applied for by the homeowner. So after the project's done, you send in an application and we will send you a check in the mail. Or usually it's direct deposit. So that's kind of home upgrades, home energy efficiency. And now I want to get into green labeling. So first off, what is a green label? It's a certification done by a professional, and it provides you information on your home and how efficient it is. There are a bunch of different types. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard of LEED. You've probably seen LEED in big commercial buildings, but they do LEED for homes. Green Point Rated is another one, Energy Star, HERS score, and Home Energy Score is one that I work on. It's through the Bay Rent program as well. And basically how Home Energy Score works is you have an assessor come out to the home. They do an assessment of the home. Depending on how big your home is, it might take an hour or two. And they give you a 1 to 10 score that tells you how efficient your home is based on, compared to other similar sized homes. And they also give you a custom recommendation sheet of stuff you can do to make improvements, what to prioritize, and that sort of thing. Some jurisdictions are starting to require these types of green labels at the time of sale. Berkeley's been doing it for a while, and Piedmont just started. And some of the benefits of getting a green label on your home is that you get a professional eye on your home, with recommendations on where you should prioritize, where you should put your money, to make your home more efficient and comfortable, and save energy on your bills and that sort of thing. And it also increases your home value, which is really interesting. So there's a study released, this was in 2012. So obviously the housing market has, in California has changed a lot since then. So I can't, speak to these numbers if they've, stayed true to that. But basically what they found was that homes that had a green label, so, the ones we talked about here, LEED, HERS, Home Energy Score, sold for about 9% more than homes that did not have a green label. And it was just the labeling. And basically what they found is that, there's some value and benefit to knowing, how efficient your home is before you buy it. It's kind of like when you buy a car and you look at the miles per gallon, kind of a similar concept to your home. So you can know, how much it's going to cost to, power it, to heat it and cool it every year. So that kind of goes beyond, just saving energy on your utility bill. These things are becoming more popular, and you can actually increase your home value, which is really great. And so now we're moving into solar. Our office gets a lot of calls of people that are looking into solar projects, and we ask them, some questions, particularly on, what is the motivation for getting solar? So if it's resiliency, keeping the lights on during a blackout, you're going to need to add a battery system. If the power goes out and you just have solar and it's a grid tied system, your power is still going to go out. You're not going to be able to run on the solar, especially at night. Is it to save money? So you'll see a better return on investment from a solar system if you have pre-solar project, if you have high electricity bills. And I have a slide coming up that gets more into that. And the other one we get is, is it environmental concerns? Do you want to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, do something great for the environment, et cetera? So, and then, we kind of have to tell people that the California grid is powered by more and more renewable, energy sources every year. And if you have NCE Deep Green, for instance, in Marin County and other jurisdictions, your electricity is coming from 100% renewable sources. So thanks to this, greening of the grid, your biggest emission sources are now your natural gas use. So your water heating, space heating, and cooking. And that's why, there's such a big push right now to get people to switch over to heat pumps for those devices, or for those appliances rather. And we'll move along here. So this is a typical bid. I took this from a presentation done by Pete Shoemaker. He's really great. He's done a couple webinars with us on solar and battery. And he basically said that, a good solar contractor will give you a sheet like this that will they'll come in and look at your energy usage for the year, and they'll basically be able to estimate, right here at around year 9 for this example, when, your project goes into the black and you start saving money. So that's just something to consider when you're going out and getting solar, to ask for this, to make sure that they provide it for you, so you can look at the financials and see if it's, a good investment, for your home. So final thoughts on solar. Like I said, the return on investment really depends on your pre-solar energy costs. And it's worth examining what you want to accomplish by going solar. Net metering 3.0. So there's actually some recent news that came out after I made this slide, but at the time, the Public Utilities Commission was considering revising net energy metering rates. So basically what that means is when you are providing excess energy to the grid from your solar system, you sell that back to the utility. And that rate is what's known as net energy metering. So there was a proposal to change that rate. Basically what it would have done is made the payback period a little bit longer, maybe a couple of years. It turns out that they decided against that because there's a lot of public pushback, from solar contractors. So that's one thing to consider too when you're getting solar, is asking about that rate and when it may or may not change. Because when you get solar before the rate changes, you're locked into that rate. And a little bit on battery. I also stole this from Pete Shoemaker. He does a really great presentation, by the way, that we have on our website, on our learning resources page, where it's about an hour-long webinar. And I really suggest that you look at that, especially if you're looking at battery and solar projects. But basically, the idea here with battery is that it's a little bit more expensive. You can see the cost comparison here between a battery and a generator. The warranty is a little bit longer, 10 years to 3. They don't make noise, and they have added value. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the added value next. So the added value is what's known as energy arbitrage. So another grid and rate, bit of change that's happening right now is time of use rates. So basically what that means is it's more expensive to pull energy from the grid at certain times of the day. I think right now it's between 4 and 9 p.m. So what you can do if you have a battery system and a battery solar system is you can, charge your home with the battery when energy is cheap, and you can use the battery when energy is more expensive. So it's, it's an arbitrage. You're buying low, selling high, right? So that is the added value of the battery. Whereas with a generator, it's really only good for, keeping the lights on when the power goes out. And other than that, there's no added value. And yeah, this is just kind of the idea here with PV and battery, is that this curve right here represents, the sun coming up and going down. You're generating excess power during this time of the day. With the battery, you can store that power and then use it when the sun goes down. So battery systems, the pros are, you get to back up your home, the energy arbitrage, there's no emissions. Cons right now, they're expensive, and smaller systems might not back up the entire home. By the way, there are portable battery systems that are powerful enough to power your refrigerator. So if you're just worried about, losing your food when power goes out, there are, smaller, cheaper systems you can get just for that. It doesn't have to be a whole house integrated system. Those can get pretty pricey. And then for the generators, they're less expensive. They can power the entire house really easily, but there's emissions. They need to be exercised regularly. So you can't just, not use it for years until, there's a blackout. You have to run it every couple months. There's maintenance, there's oil changes. And yeah, like I said, it's only useful during the power outage. You don't get that energy arbitrage aspect. So Drive Clean Bay Area is a really great group. I stole this from Annika Osborne's slides. I got permission for all this slide stealing, by the way. But she also gave a webinar with us that we have on our website, and I took this from that. And I just like this slide because it really kind of breaks down the total cost of ownership with electric vehicles and gas vehicles. You can see here that, you know, your electricity is going to be less than your gas usage, right? Maintenance goes way down because there's less moving parts with electric vehicles, less things break, and yeah, so overall it's less to own an electric vehicle. And of course, if you have solar, you can be powering your car, you know, during the evening when you're not using it, which is great. And then this is just a slide on the current incentives for EVs. There's quite a bit out there. Again, I would recommend checking out the webinar that Annika gave with us, just because she really gets into all the different programs. It can get a little complicated with all the different stuff out there. You have to do multiple applications, but there are a lot of resources out there for getting an electric vehicle. And yep, that's Drive Clean Bay Area's website. And I provided all these references for everybody to check out, because I know I went through this really quickly. But again, you know, our office is always open. If you have questions about any of these projects, we're always happy to talk to folks. You know, I work for the county, I work for you, I work for everybody in Marin. So so yeah, and that's it for my presentation. Thanks again, and Christine, for having me, and thanks everybody for listening.
And I'm glad you concluded with EVs, because, you know, when you talked about how in California with so many clean sources of power feeding into our grid, we typically, you know, for most of us, our biggest emissions are now our vehicles and our gas appliances. Yeah. So Kellen, I wanted to say that I thank you for pointing out the value of how it's often we don't think so much about energy savings and money savings because they seem less glamorous than money coming in. But, you know, Ben Franklin said a penny saved is a penny earned. And actually, it's more than a penny earned, because earned pennies are taxed and saved pennies are not. So depending on your tax bracket, savings is actually worth more than earning. And so, Kellen, one question I have for you. You mentioned the tech program in Marin County and how it helps people make transitions to, is it to gas, from gas appliances? Did I hear that correctly? Or can you tell us about that program?
Yeah, so I mean, the general concept there is electrification. So when you think about your home, your gas is usually in your water heating, your space heating, and your cooking. So the County Marin has a program that gives a rebate for switching for all those. So for cooking, it would be induction cooktops, which are really great. We don't have time to get into them, but they're fantastic. And then heat pump water heaters for your water heating, and heat pump space heating for your space heating. And the tech program provides additional rebates on top of that, which are, you know, pretty big, like, you know, $3,800 for a heat pump water heater, which can, you know, almost get up to, you know, depending on the contractor and that sort of thing, but I've seen it get up to maybe 60-70% of the total cost.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you a question about contractors, and I see someone else asked the question too in the Q&A. You know, sometimes many of us have had the experience of our hot water heater goes and it never goes at a convenient time, and then we can't find a contractor who really seems to know or support the idea of electric electric hot water systems. There's, you know, still there seems to be a lot more expertise and buy-in to gas on that. So do you guys have a list of qualified contractors? Is there some kind of program to increase the number of contractors who are used to, you know, installing these heavy-duty heating appliances that are electric rather than gas-fired?
Yeah, we think these additional rebates will really make a difference and get a lot of contractors on board. I'll respond to Leslie's question with some links to websites for contractor directories. But you're absolutely right, and I just want to touch on that too. That you know, when especially water heating, you don't want to go a couple days without hot water, obviously. So it's really good to be proactive about that, especially if you're thinking about switching to, you know, a different type of appliance, because there may be a couple more steps involved. You might have to upgrade your service panel, for example. So it's better not to wait until something goes out, because you're right. You know, contractors are basically set up to come in, replace same day, and be done with it. So yeah, it's really about, I think a lot of the driving force for heat pump water heaters is going to be the public asking for it, and not just, you know, contractors selling heat pumps when they go out to replace a gas water heater.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I've heard replace on burnout as a possible thing, whereby there's some kind, potentially there could be legislation. You look like you know that part. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's something that some jurisdictions are looking into. I will say that for water heating, it's kind of tough. Like, just because I mentioned people don't want to go a couple days without hot water. So that, it is something that some jurisdictions are looking into to pass, similar to the time of sale ordinance for green labeling homes. And I think that the big thing right now, Fairfax just did this. They did an all electric reach code for new construction. So that'll be more of the phase out, I think, is, jurisdictions passing codes that say, when you're building a new home, you can't put in any gas. And that'll, kind of push things along as well as,
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Marin County, we don't have so much new construction as we have existing. So the replace on burnout code is, the idea of getting that passed in certain jurisdictions has not happened. But basically the fundamental idea is that when an appliance goes out, like a hot water heater, gas-fired hot water heater, it would have to be replaced on burnout with an electrical one. And we really don't have the infrastructure to support that. With, the legislation isn't there either, but
Yeah,
possible direction for the future.
Yeah, I will say that the Bay Run program has thought of this. We spend all day thinking about, plumbing contractors and, and how to get them more involved. One thing they thought of is a loaner program. So you loan a, water heater, like a normal water heater, gas water heater, until you can, kind of push somebody to, come back and replace it with a heat pump.
Well, actually, it's kind of related to a question we just got in, which is there any place we can see and experience a heat pump water heater and an induction cooktop? Is there like a demo?
Yeah, actually the Sonoma, I'll put this in the chat too, but the Sonoma Energy Center just opened, and that's a great place where you can go and get hands-on experience with all these different technologies. I'm from San Diego. We had a similar place like that that SDG&E set up. And yeah, it's open to the public. You can go there and get hands-on experience with an induction cooktop. You can look at a heat pump water heater. Yeah, thanks for asking that. That's really great. Yeah.
Okay, well, it looks like we are out of time. It's 5:25. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you, to Allison, Sarah, Kellen. I've learned a lot this evening. It's been remarkable. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and expertise. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, which is the Marin Community Foundation, and most of all of you for attending today. I hope this webinar has given you a deeper understanding of some of the ways in which, we have influence with our money, and we have a deeper understanding of the ways in which we can be using our money to support our values when we make purchases or when we bank. And I hope that you've come away with some ideas for actions that you can take. So